Hello everyone, welcome to the Everything Dodgeball podcast. I'm your host, Stefan Leidinger, and today I have a very special guest, our president, Mr. Duane Wysynski, if I said that correctly.
Perfect.
So first of all, thank you for coming on the podcast. Thank you for hopping on. And first of all, how are you? And then let's just dive into it.
I'm good, thanks. And thank you for asking me. I know we talked a bit about this in Limerick about getting together and chatting. And now's a good time as any, all things considered. So I appreciate being here and looking forward to it. Conversation.
Perfect. Yeah. Obviously, when we talked in Limerick, I said once the decision stands, would you be interested in coming on the pod and explaining the situation and giving us a little bit of a behind the scenes story to it? But now I think that I at least have a feeling that in the community, the worldwide dodgeball community, which is by now a quite big one and a very multifaceted and a lot of different people have joined that community even recently. And so I think the process of finding a new host for the next World Championships has been a little bit of a contentious issue over the last few weeks. So I felt it might be interesting for everyone, for me as well, to get you on and maybe talk a little bit about the background stories and making the process as transparent as possible and giving the people a little bit more information, what it's been like, why it's so tough to find a new host, and what the issues, topics, and concerns are, basically. So I hope we can get a little bit into that.
Yes.
But first of all, I want to just start with you. So give us a little bit of a backstory, who you are, what you've done in the world of dodgeball, and how you got to become president of the WDBF.
Yeah. So my wife is the one that kind of got me into dodgeball and probably regrets it. Like years ago. I mean, now we're talking like probably 20, 25 years ago. There was a local team she played with. She was asked to play with her company in like a sport and social club, recreation league, and so she couldn't play. She was pregnant at the time, but hadn't told her coworkers. So she said, "Well, can you just take my spot? Can you play?" I did. I really liked it. Ended up getting a team with my friends. We still play on Wednesday nights, like 20 something years later. Not all the same people, obviously. The people have come and gone, but a few of us are still there. And kind of, loved the community, loved playing, loved the sport. And like for me, I just, I realized kind of in Canada that there was a lot of leagues and a lot of things happening, but there wasn't really anything joined up together. And so we worked starting in 2015. We started Dodgeball Canada to try to get all these different leagues, these different formats, different players together under one tent. And then pretty quickly after that, we started working with some other countries that were at the time the WDBF. It was really informal group of people, and it was about maybe 7-8 countries. And then in 2017 we hosted Worlds in Toronto, and we decided that we kind of had to be more formal. We had to be a bit more serious about what we were trying to do, and we kind of created the first board at the time. And so I was kind of asked, I guess you could say, to be present at that point in time. And so that was in 2017, incorporated 2018. And as you know, EDF kind of joined with us in 2019. So we've been kind of going ever since, trying to kind of develop governance. We've been getting bigger very fast, which like sounds like a nice problem to have, but is actually like a real problem in a lot of ways, which we can chat about. But yeah, been with WDBF ever since. And I've kind of enjoyed it. It's been a heck of a journey, and there's a lot going on, and there's always a million things in the fire at any one time. But the world of sport is fun, and having like a new sport that just kind of, has been around for a long, long time. But in terms of like formality and trying to kind of get a bit more profile internationally, it's been interesting.
Wow. Well, you could say that escalated quite quickly.
Yeah.
So basically a very innocent question from your wife, and then she did not know what she was in for, basically, or
Yeah.
what she started with that little invitation. Okay, that is awesome. That is like a really true dodgeball connection story there. So what do you do in your professional world, or what makes you qualified to sort of handle all
Yeah,
that
that's
stuff and be the head of such a
that's
fast-growing
yeah.
organization?
It's two very different questions. So I in my real world, I'm a management consultant. I do consulting for different organizations. A lot of it is government, some not for profit, some corporations, and I do consulting around like maybe, in the old days when I started the company, like 10, 15 years ago, I was doing a lot of what they called business integration. So, new systems, software systems, or information management systems. And I would work kind of between the business and the IT folks. And then now at this point in my life, I do, what they call business transformation, where I do change management, or I do process development, or I help organizations that are going through a big change. Like, how do you work with employees? How do you get buy-in? How do you account for all the different factors that might kind of get in the way and screw things up as time goes by? So that's what I do now. In terms of like background qualifications for this type of thing, I've done a lot of governance work. My first kind of role in sport was with the well, as a member, like I was a member of groups like the Association for Track and Field Statisticians and the Society for American Baseball Research, did that kind of thing. But my first kind of role on a board was with the Ontario Special Olympics Region 8 when I was living in Thunder Bay when I was done university, and that was in the late 90s. And I was the treasurer, I think, on that board for a little while. And then I worked with Athletics Alberta, which is the provincial arm for Athletics Canada. I did that for about, I think, 8 years. I was the vice president there. And then one of the founding members of Dodgeball Canada and one of the incorporating members for WDBF. So I've done a lot of stuff in governance for sport, and like I do some other board works and other not for profit board work. So just I enjoy it, and over time you learn a lot. You make a lot of mistakes and you learn a lot as you go, but and you surround yourself with good people. But that's kind of how I've kind of come to this position over time.
Okay, very interesting. So, just a little side question for me personally, because it's very interesting to me. People who spend a lot of time in a sport like dodgeball and do a lot of voluntary work. What does your significant other say to that? How is her relationship with dodgeball? Is she still involved, or
No, no,
is
no,
she
no, no,
fond of your
no.
night job?
She's never even played. No, she, I mean, to be very honest, I think for like the first years that I was playing it, like I started playing, I think in 2006 or something like that. And for the first years that I was playing, it was great because it was just something I did. It was an activity. It was, something I did with friends. But as I started to kind of get into the governance piece with Dodgeball Canada and then with WDBF, I think for the first while it was really difficult because it was a lot of work, and I don't think either of us knew how much work it was going to be and how much time it was going to take. And my kids were still at an age where like there was we were spending a lot of time with the kids, and they were still, needing a lot of time, which was wonderful. But it creates for a very full day. I mean, if you have kids and people, you kind of know kind of the demand, and so you're trying to juggle like your work and your family and the relationship you have with each other. That always takes work as time goes by, and then now this volunteer thing. But at this point, I think in the last few years, especially with a lot that's happened in the organization getting a lot bigger, and specific initiatives that we're involved with, I think she sees this as kind of a really good thing and a really good part of my life, and which I appreciate. Like, I'm really grateful because it's not an easy thing. Like, it's not an easy thing because this takes a certain amount of it's not a priority in with respect to our relationship or even job or family as a whole, but it does take a lot of time. And so if she was a player, she'd probably have a different outlook. But as a non-player and somebody kind of on the outside looking in, I think she's come to a place where she sees value in it for me, and she supports that. So I'm grateful.
Okay, that is absolutely awesome because I know from personal experience that it doesn't matter at which level, it takes a lot of time. And if your partner isn't completely involved, then it sometimes can be a very difficult thing to sort of manage that. So, a question regarding that currently, what would you say, percent wise? How much time do you spend at your professional work, and how much time do you spend for WDBF?
So my
maybe on a
professional,
monthly basis?
yeah, well, I mean, I can kind of do it on a weekly. It's a bit easier. So
Yeah.
I work full time with my, like, I have one major client right now, and I work full time for them. I work from home, which is really good because it allows me to do, like, even doing things like this. Like, I can kind of shift my work
Uh,
schedule. This client, this particular person that I work for right now, is really good in that they're really objective focused, outcome focused. So it's not, I need to answer the phone at this time and this time and this time. It's, here's the things you need to do. And so I kind of can tailor my schedule and move things around as I need to, which is helpful. But I mean, how many hours do I spend a week on dodgeball? I mean, at least 20. I think would be fair.
mm,
When we get closer to a big event or the AGM or anything like that, then you're talking probably 30 to 40. But I think kind of on a general, I mean, if I spend 3 hours a day, I think is a pretty fair estimate. Even having one or two phone calls a day, which is definitely going to happen, that's going to take up about an hour anyway, and then everything else in between. So I'd say probably about 20 to 30 hours a week.
mm. Okay, yeah, that's fair. And so, for someone who might want to help you and take over your job, what do people have to do to become president of the World
Yeah.
Dodgeball
So
Federation?
the process itself is an election. I mean, it's a straight election. So the way the bylaws, and so the bylaws are written in accordance with Corporations Canada. So we follow the Canada Not for Profit Act. But it's, the Canada Not for Profit Act is really, really similar to most of the processes in the United States or Europe or Hong Kong, Australia. Um, the way it works is for a president, or secretary general or deputy president, whatever you're interested in, you would have a nomination from your national federation, or supported at least by your national federation. There would be a nomination process prior to the annual general meeting, at which there is an election, and then it would be a member vote. So for the four roles that we call the directorate, so president, deputy president, secretary general, and treasurer, that's elected directly by the membership. So each country has a vote. Each full member has a vote.
Mhm.
If you want to be a vice president and you want to represent Europe or Asia or Africa, then you have to be elected by your Continental Congress. And then that position is then confirmed at the AGM. So if you were interested in being vice president representing Europe, when you're ready, there you could be select. So you don't have to be the president of the EDF, but you could be, there could be a president of the EDF, and then there could be a separate person that EDF Congress or North America, South America Congress says, okay, we want Stefan to be our representative to the WDBF, and then you would become vice president in that respect.
Okay, and how often are those votings taking place?
There are 4 year cycles, 4 year cycles for
4 years.
elections.
Okay.
For the
Mhm.
continental ones, they're also 4 year cycles, but yeah, as it sometimes happens, and as we're actually going through this right now with two of the continents, where they might change their representative or their internal leadership, and then that would be in place until the next election in a temporary way.
Okay, so how many elections did you go through in the last years?
Well, just the one, because in 2018 we incorporated and we selected the first board, and then that was for 4 year. Or sorry, then we selected the first board, and then in 2019, so I guess technically a couple. So selected in 2017 for the first board, we incorporated in 2018. In 2019, we had a vote for those positions, which now included representatives from Europe and Africa and Asia, and that was in 19. And then in late 23, we had another round of elections in late 23, and then now we'll be looking at the next, like, 4 years to the next round.
Okay, and
Four,
so
4 years
how
from
many
23.
opponents did you? Yeah, so how many opponents did you have to fend off for that prestigious position?
None. There was no.
Yeah.
Uh, so when I was appointed for the 2000 to start 2018, it was, again, we were a small group. Like, there was like 7 people, so we basically just divided up positions. In 2019, there was there were no contested positions. And then in 2023, there were 2 contested positions for Secretary General and for Deputy President. And then Treasurer and President were not contested. And then, of course, the Vice President positions are only contested within the region, and then they come to the
Mhm.
WDBF Congress for confirmation, essentially.
Okay, perfect. Just to build a little bit of a picture of what it means to be
Yeah,
president,
yeah,
and if anyone wants to take on that role of 20 hours a week of
yeah,
not too greatly paid
yeah. Well,
work,
not it.
then so do you want to get into your salary a little
No,
bit?
there's no. It's all volunteer. Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's all volunteer.
Exactly. So
All the
so
positions are volunteer.
I
Yeah,
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 yeah. So but because I think that's really important
yeah,
to just know for everyone. I think most people are aware that there's only voluntary jobs at that
yeah,
level, and I think that is very important in sports. But still, some people, I think this might be
yeah.
news for them.
We
So
have.
thanks for going into depth on
Oh
that.
yeah, no, you're welcome. I was just gonna say there have been times where we have had like small paid roles for, like, say somebody came in and they said, well, I really want to develop a program for the deaf, or I really want to develop a program, a Paralympic program. And there was, then that person wanted to kind of spend some time doing it, and there needed to be some funding or money for that. Then we would try to find funding or money for that particular thing. But for the governance roles or the
Mm,
committee roles, like you see people that are like on different committees, those are all volunteer positions, which
yeah,
I assume is the
for sure.
same
So
in pretty
what
much everyone continent.
I do believe so.
Yeah,
Maybe some continents work differently, but as far as I know, in Europe, it's
yeah,
pretty much the same. All right. So then let's get into the election cycle for the new host nation. I think that is something a lot of people want to hear about. So tell me a little bit about the formal process of
sure.
how do I become a host nation and who decides, and how is the structural
So
process in
yeah,
place?
so this is a this is a sorry, apologize. This is a pretty new process in terms of deciding between different applications. So for the first, I mean, from 2012 to 2000 and, well, like literally from 2012 to Graz in 24, it's basically just been one country who said we're interested. So for the first few years that we did this, um, and like I said, we had 7, 8 countries. There was kind of this idea of like everyone would take a turn, right? So Malaysia did the first one, then New Zealand, then Hong Kong, then the United States, then Australia, Canada. Like we literally just kind of went around. And then as the organization got bigger, there were more countries that were interested. And I think you probably know that, and maybe some people listening don't know this, but British Dodgeball had put up their hand to do the event in Glasgow in 20. And of course, the pandemic struck. And then after that was done, it wasn't possible for them to pick that up. So Canada picked it up in 22, kind of by default, right? Like, this is, we wanted to have the event, and Austria had been interested, but they weren't ready at that point in time. So we did it in 22, and then Austria, who had wanted to do it, then they got to do it in 24. Generally speaking, we've never really had to have a process, um, a formal bidding process outside of, like, we always had bid guidelines, we always had things that the host nation had to do, but there was never really a bidding war because it's an expensive thing to host. And for the first, I mean, up until Graz, we never charged fees to teams to play, so teams could play, they didn't have to pay a fee to play. So it was not really, how shall I put this, countries wanted to do it, but you had to have the resources and you had to have the community that was willing to really put forward, because most of the time there was a debt to involve to the competition. So when when 24 wrapped up, it was kind of the first time that several countries approached us and said we were interested, we were interested. So we put together a bid package, and we did so kind of building on a couple of things, building on the package that we had initially. Then we looked at the way that some other sports did and some of the things that they included in their bid packages. And then we included some of the feedback that we've got from both 22 and 24 from players in terms of, okay, what what needs to be better, what needs to be addressed for the next time. So all of that went into a bid package. That bid package, we notified members that it was there. We did notify it on the website and our social media, and we got probably about, I want to say, 6 countries or so that sent initial, like, we're interested. But a couple of the countries that were interested were doing so on behalf of like tourism boards or like local municipalities. They weren't doing it on behalf of their federation. And in those cases, the federations were not interested in supporting the bid. Like, they weren't really ready to do it. So at the end of the day, we had 3 um, countries that submitted bids. We had an initial deadline that we extended a couple times at their request. And so we had 3 nations submit bids. The format was like they could do whatever format they wanted. It could be a Word doc, it could be a PowerPoint or whatever, but they had to make sure they addressed the components in the bid package. And then that package was sent out to board members, to review and score and comment. Then we got together as an organization, as the board, and we had a couple of meetings where we scored the bids. So which of the bids placed higher, which of the ones it demonstrated the highest readiness, ability to support Worlds. And then from that, we didn't select a host, but we confirmed the highest scoring bid. So we let everyone know like who the highest scoring bid was of those 3, and then began discussions on next steps. So
So the
that's
high
basically.
scoring bid. Okay, so the high scoring bid, on what baseline do you decide? Is there like a formal checklist where and who does
Yes.
the checking of the bids basically?
Yes. So all the board members do the checking of the bids. So they look at the bids, they get the documents, they do their own scoring, and then we compare scoring. The scores are based on, so there's different categories. So there's facilities, there's like host experience, there's venue accommodation, there's accessibility. There's different categories that have different weighted scores. And then there's a series of yes, no questions that are make or break, right? So if, even if a bid scores 50 out of 50, if they don't agree to the yes, no questions, then they can't host, right? So the yes, no questions are make or break. And then those are reviewed by the board. We go over it. We go back to the prospective host or the submitter if we have any questions or if we need any clarification or if we need validation, and then we make a selection from there. So this was the first year that we did it this way, because in the past, like I said, we've sent out bid packages and we've gotten the prospective host to tell us their plans and answer those questions, but they were generally the only one. This is the first time we've had more than one really that compete at the same time.
Mhm. And I'm sorry if I missed it, but who is the board and how does the board get elected, or who are those board members?
Yeah, so well, it's the board is the 4 directly elected positions and the continental representatives, the continental vice presidents.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay, so it's 10 people,
it's 10 people.
or are there some overlaps?
No, there's 10 people. There is 1 vacant position, but that position wasn't vacant at the time of the selection, so it's 10 people. Yeah.
Mhm. Okay, and those 10 people have the final say. Is it by majority, or how is the decision made in the end, or is it by consensus, or?
Yeah, it's most decisions are by majority. Some decisions are by special majority, depending on the nature of the decision. So for something like the host, we would want a special majority. We would want a 2/3 majority, so that
Mhm.
we were like sure that this is what we wanted to do to move forward, or we were sure of the outcome. So in this case, when we're scoring and we're comparing notes and we're agreeing to which bid scored the highest, we don't want it to be I mean, if the vote was 5-5, then somebody's not, then there's an issue with the interpretation of it on someone's behalf, right? So that you have
Mhm.
5 people who are looking at it one way, 5 the other. If the scores are really close by a point or two, then you can understand that. But if the scores are far apart, then it would be problematic if there was too much discrepancy in the voting, right? Because it would show that we're not
Hmm.
defining things properly, or we have a very different understanding of what things mean in the scoring.
Hmm. Okay. And so once the scoring is checked and the scores are in, what's the next step in deciding who hosts?
Yeah,
Is
it's
it finalized by then, or?
no. At that point in time, you notify the parties and you notify the highest scoring organization, and then you take next steps. And depending on the country, the next steps might be very different, right? The next steps might be a country that says, "Great, we're good to go whenever," and then then you go to the step afterwards. Some countries might say, "Okay, that's great. Now we have to confirm some things on our end, or we need to review some things to make sure, timing wise or venue availability at the right times." And so then that process could take quite a while if that's the case, like depending on the internal process. Then when we get to a point where we say, okay, you've scored the highest, and the prospective host says, okay, we're good to go, then we get into the next step, which is now like a contract discussion. So what is it that you're committing to provide? Like, you've said you're going to do this, and we're able to validate to some degree that you are likely to do this, and you've gone back and come back and said, okay, we agree we're going to do this. Now we've got to get into more of a formal situation where we say, okay, on paper now we've got to commit to these things that have to happen. These things have to be in place. um, this is how it's going to look for accommodations or travel or broadcast or merchandise or venue accessibility. And then we get that all into an agreement, and then when that agreement is signed, then we're kind of done. We've got the commitment.
Mhm. Okay. And so can you take me specifically through that process with the current election with a little bit more detail, or is that something that is, I'd say, open knowledge and transparent, that people can basically check onto that process, or is that something that is closed up?
No, I mean, like, some things are open, some things are closed. So the uh, evaluation, or sorry, the bid package that includes the scoring is available. All the member federations got it, right? It was sent out, last year. So that document is not private. I mean, people can look at it and they can, look through it and say, these things make sense, these things don't. You should put more emphasis on A, you should put less emphasis on B. That's available to anyone who wants to take a look at it. We generally don't share the contents of the bids themselves, um, because I mean, we can talk about the score, like we could talk about the scoring, we can talk about the order in which countries finished or that sort of thing to some degree. But obviously, if a country doesn't get the bid, or if the bid is not particularly strong, I don't think it's kind of very fair to talk about, you know, specific shortcomings or issues. And I think that's something like we talk about with the prospective host or the applicant, and talk about
Mhm.
like, hey, next time maybe, talk more about this or include that. But that's not something we would share publicly. I just don't think it would be fair in that case for the
That
for the
absolutely
for some of the
fair
bids.
enough.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, sure. So without going into those details, how did the current process, how did it run its course, and where are we at, basically?
Yeah, so we had, there were 3 applicants. Um, the one that scored the highest scored like a bit higher, like than the other 2, to be honest. And so where we are with that is that applicant's been informed. They have to now go back and get uh, an agreement from their organization and their board and their sports authority to move to the next steps, especially since, if an organization is going to deliver on what they promise, they're probably going to need that support set up. I mean, it's been with, like, for let me give you an example. When Edmonton hosted, one of the things that we knew up front was the funding commitment that they had. And so if you know what the funding commitment is, and you have you look at their budget, and you look at what they're planning to do, then through experience, we can kind of say, yeah, this isn't going to cut it. Like your funding's low, and the budget is high. So how are you going to fill the gap? And if that's not the case, if the funding is there and the budget makes sense, then you feel satisfied that can move to the next step. So where it stands right now, they've been notified, and there's a process going on. But there are always alternatives that get explored, because you always need a plan B, and you always need, I mean, there's lots of things that could happen in any country, in any situation, where you decide that that's not feasible anymore, and you have to figure out what might happen next. There's also the case of a country doing well on a bid, but there's a couple of shortcomings where you think, you're not going to be ready for 26, but you might be perfectly suited for 28, or you might be ready for a future edition. And so how do you kind of work with that country to say, like, this is good. It might not be there right now, but it's going to be good, and it's going to be a great choice in the future. So how do you kind of work with that to kind of say, if that's something you're interested, then we can kind of move along that line as well.
Mm-hmm. So basically, the checklist is the first, I'd say, hurdle that they have to cross. And then you have sort of an objective evaluation, which country seems to fit best as host.
Yes.
But it isn't decided only because of the checklist, right?
No, well, it's not only because of the checklist, in the sense that, like, the countries still have to prove they're going to do what they say, right? So you can submit a bid and say, we're going to spend $1 million on an event. That doesn't happen, obviously, but you could submit that and say that, and on a checklist, that's going to look really good, or on a score sheet, it's going to look good. But then the idea is, okay, now that you've made this commitment, like, you need to show us how you're going to do it. And the tricky part is, a lot of times when countries bid, I mean, everybody who's listening knows that dodgeball is generally, with very few exceptions, not a funded sport, not a recognized sport, not an approved sport in a lot of countries, Olympic committees or national sport authorities. So a lot of times the funding has to come from maybe a tourism grant, or maybe there's a private investor, or maybe it's from the national sport authority, if you've got a good relationship. And some countries have been able to do that for their events. But we know that those processes take a lot of time. It's very bureaucratic. It's not simple. I know from experience that, I've put in requests for funding and got told, we'll get back to you next week. And next week becomes next month. The next month becomes 2 months from now. So when countries first put in their bids, there's a certain good faith component where they say, we're going to get funding. And you say, okay, we believe you. But then at some point there has to be a bit more that says, okay, we've got this, or here's the progress, or here's the letter from the funding source saying that it's coming. And then those things get validated.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so step 2 is checking the checklist.
Yes.
Basically, and seeing. Okay.
So just to back up, I would just say like that's probably step 3, because step 1 is that initial expression of interest, right? So it is the first thing, like I said, where we had an organization in Canada reach out and say, can you send us a package? We're interested in doing this. But then we have to go back to Dodgeball Canada and say, are you interested in doing this? Because, they're coming to us on your behalf, so to speak. And then, in that case, we had just hosted in 22. So of course it wasn't going to be feasible. And that was a couple countries where that happened. So step 1 is that expression of interest, and making sure that it's a valid one from a federation that's kind of willing and ready to do it. Step 2 is kind of the bid package and the return of the bid package, preparation, evaluation of that. And then step 3 is all kind of like the post review work to validate, to confirm, and to make sure that both sides are actually ready to proceed.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And how did that play out this time around?
Still in progress.
Like the third step.
Yeah, still in progress.
Still in progress.
Yeah,
okay.
Still in progress. Yeah.
Okay. So obviously, like, I think the date is set for somewhere in October 2026. Is that right?
We're actually looking at, and this would be the truth, no matter which of the candidates was selected. We're looking at November, so it might be the end of November,
Mhm,
very beginning of December at the latest. So in 2019, we
mhm,
did we did end of November, beginning of December, because Cancun, Mexico was the host, and we were trying to avoid hurricane season, and that was kind of the latest we should it. In the countries that have applied, it just makes a lot more sense to be in that time frame. So probably the end of the year
mhm.
26.
Okay, end of the year 26. So obviously, hosting a World Championships is quite the heavy burden, as far as I experience it from living quite
From you,
close to
yeah, yeah.
Max and yeah, and talking a lot of to him about the process in 2024. So it's probably not getting any easier if more nations join. So what is like your current deadline that you're working with, and are there like other options if those deadlines are not being met?
So yes, so we would like to have. I mean, I'm going to be very honest. It kind of keeps shifting, right? Because we had
Mm,
kind of said like we really wanted everything um, ready to go to the next step by the end of July, and then that became the end of August. So now we're pushing it through to the end of September. We have also spoken on kind of like what does an alternative arrangement look like, and is that even possible anymore, given the timeline? And if not, then what, right? And so there's, I
mm,
mean, you do have a plan B, you do have a plan C, plan D, um, to make sure that you've got something understood for what's going to happen next year. But I would say like this month we should everything should be decided and everything should be moving to that next step.
okay. So what can you tell me about the decision progress? What's still missing? What are the current considerations, and what's keeping the board from making a final decision?
Yeah. So for uh, for all of the applicants, there's a few things that, again, just going back to the bid where we say, okay, well, this is an important factor and you have to kind of be able to do this and you have to be able to. So there's a couple of those things that are just outstanding. One has to do with internal approval processes. So making sure that there's internal approvals to do the things that are required. Second is, there's things from our point of view that we have to do to make sure, and some things are taking a little longer, but they're kind of newer things that we've introduced. So I would say kind of the biggest thing is not that the organization isn't committed to go, or in this case, any of those three organizations are committed to go, but it's logistics, right? And trying to confirm um, venues, dates, and funding and support for other parts of the application that we make sure that need to be in place, that need to happen. Yeah. And
Mhm,
so, I mean, and I can't, I mean, the only thing I would say is in any of those situations, and this was true with Graz and this was true with Canada, is just it's the bureaucratic piece, right? Like, again, you apply for funding, you don't have any control of when you get that information, you might get pushed off. You try to get a venue and you're told, well, we have college sports in this venue, we have university sports in this venue, so that schedule doesn't come out until September. So when it does, then we'll let you know if the dates you want are available. Like those are the things that always get kind of hung up in the process.
mhm. Okay. And like going back maybe to 2024, and with the experiences you had up to that point, it's now over a year past that last event, and that this isn't supposed to be a criticism, just
No, no, no.
out of curiosity and to understand the process. So what takes a whole year, and how can it be that even after a year it's still,
Yeah,
I know that lots you're
yeah, yeah,
often very yeah, so it just lots of things are out of your hand,
yeah,
but how what steps are being taken to try and to really finalize it,
yeah,
and also for maybe the future that process like this can
yeah,
get
yeah.
done smoother.
Smoother. No, no, no. Both good questions. So the first one was when we left Graz in August, we started preparing the bid package, and we were collecting feedback at that time from players, coaches, and different participants and member federations, like talking about what was good about Graz, what was bad, and comparing that to Edmonton. Like, is there something that was persisting over every year that we hadn't yet corrected, or was there a new problem? I mean, Graz was Edmonton and Graz were both very they were kind of pilots in a way, right? Because Edmonton was the first time that we ever did cloth and foam at the same event. So it's like, okay, the court lines were slightly different, not the external courts because we had agreed upon that, but the internal lines were different. The length of games were a little different. Like there was a lot of things that were different in terms of timeouts and time matches. And so for those of you who remember Edmonton, like some of the schedules got really twisted because we went really far over on some games. And so trying to kind of like, well, how do you manage two formats at one event? And that was the first time we ever did that. And then when we got to Graz, we had learned a little something about that, and we had kind of put that into the formatting. But now we had like way more teams than we had ever had. Like the most teams we'd ever had at a World Championships going into Edmonton was probably 14 teams, men's and women's. And so now we were at 67 teams, 65 or 67 teams in Edmonton. And then we were over 120 in Graz, right? So these big jumps in participation. And so managing things in Graz was like just a whole new level of learnings and lessons learned about how to do the force. So we were taking the information from both of those to inform the bid package to make changes to what we needed to do. And so that package, I think, I want to say it was sent out in October, but to be honest, I think we were quite late in sending out. Like we probably didn't get it out till the late fall. And then countries
Mhm.
got it. We started to get the expressions of interest. You weed through the ones that are, and then in the new year, we were asked to extend their response time to the end of March or mid-April, something like that. So then now you're already in mid-April. Then we get to reviewing, getting together as a group to compare notes, questions and answers going back and forth. And then that takes another couple months. And then finally, I think it was like, I want to say it was late April, early May, where we had like a ranking. And then now you start dealing with the federations and going through that process. So it's a lot. And like I said, in previous iterations where we only had one country put up their hand, the selection was kind of easy, right? So what we had historically done is we had announced at the World Championships where the next World Championships, we did that in Edmonton with Graz, but Austria had already kind of put their hand up like 2 years prior to that. So we knew, and they were the only ones. And in previous years when we were holding the World Championships every year and we were cycling through, again, it was pretty easy. So now going through a bid process and evaluation and going back and forth, it's taken longer. Your second question, like how do you make it smoother? It's funny because we were talking to one of our international organizations, and they were saying, well, we do 5-year cycle. Like we do a 5-year, not a 5-year cycle for the event. The event happens every couple of years, but we do a 5-year cycle for evaluations and candidates. So they start now for their candidate like 2 hosts from now. So we do want to start doing that. And we did talk about with this particular bid, because there were other bids that were strong. Like, do we say, okay, listen, maybe we select 26 and we select 28? Because now we've given ourselves a lot of runway and we've given the host a lot of runway. And if there is any shortcoming or any gap that has to be closed, they've got 2.5 years to do it as opposed to 2 or 1. And so we have
Mm.
thought about that. The bigger cycle is a bit problematic because I'm not sure that we're at a point where a lot of federations know where they're going to be financially or within their own sport landscape in 3 or 4 or 5 years. So is a country like, there are a few, and I know there are a few because they've already kind of asked about it, who feel like 5 years, 6 years from now, they're going to be around, they're going to be in good shape, and they want to host. But a lot of federations are like, well, we lost members in COVID, or we're still building, or we've shifted our focus from A to B, and that's kind of created a bit of uncertainty. Or the country, speaking as a Canadian, or the country decides to like clamp down on funding and not support new sports. And so it's like, oh, well, I guess, our hopes of being in a better position in 5 years, we don't know that. So we can't put our hat in the ring. But I think the idea is to kind of give a lot more leeway to when selections are made, and that just gives everybody a better view.
Mhm. Yeah, obviously that's just the growing pains of a sport that's growing so rapid, and an organization that it has tentupled in the last
Yeah,
few years, basically. And so obviously those are just basically a good thing and a bad
yeah,
thing, because it means a lot of things are changing and much more participants, but also the events are just getting way bigger and much harder to manage. And so it's sort of a good and a bad thing.
yeah.
But yeah.
Well, I was just going to say, but we looked at
Mm,
we looked at do we limit participation, right? Like, do we have a system that other sports have, where you have a continental qualification system, and then you feed into worlds? And we actually did look at that following 2019. So when Glasgow was going to host in 2021, we did look at, like, do we do 4 countries from each region, or do we do, like, the bigger regions get 5 and the smaller ones get 2 or 3? But part of the problem was, we went through this ridiculous growth period between 2019 and 2022, where so many countries were coming into the fold, and some were coming with this idea. And I think this is important, is in a lot of countries in the world, they're not going to get support from their government or their community unless they demonstrate a path forward. And for a lot of those countries, it means being at continentals right away, or being at worlds right away. And so the idea was, well, okay, so we could limit, like, if we wanted to limit, say 20 teams per division, let's just say, or 10 teams per division. So you restrict Europe to X number of teams, or you restrict Asia to X number of teams, and they can go through the process to qualify. And there might be an added value to continentals, because it would raise the stakes and it would make it. But again, like, is there value to making it, like, did Graz have value in the sense that you had teams from Colombia there, or from, you know, Chile or Ivory Coast, or teams that weren't necessarily going to be very strong, but their participation there was going to foster growth back home. They were going to go back home and they were going to say, "Hey, we finished 16th in the world." But, like, for a lot of communities, 16th in the world is going to be pretty good, and it's going to make the newspapers, and it's going to drive people to come and play, because those people have a path forward, right? So I think we're going to see a big inclusive worlds for the next couple of them, and then we're going to, as time goes by, figure out how we kind of manage that, because uh, it might not be a sustainable trend, depending on how big we keep getting.
mm, yeah, absolutely. So yeah, that's probably a tough thing to sustain if it keeps growing like that. But as you said, it's really important, because dodgeball isn't a recognized sport in most countries, and so having like sort of that top down approach, where you can show with a big international community and help the regional and continental and countries to get more recognition, more funding, more players, and more stability as well, will feed back to the top in the end as well. So obviously it makes a lot of sense to keep them that big, but also it has a lot of trouble potential. So
It does.
yeah, it's a tough
Yeah,
edge to
it does.
balance, basically.
And if we want to get into, like, we had, like, the World Youth Open here in Calgary in Canada in February, and it was just like an open youth event. And it, by design, it wasn't meant to be like massive. It was meant to just be a starting point. But as we get into the realm of having, like, a global junior competition, uh, a global schools university competition, which is a different thing governed by a different group. If we get into a global para dodgeball competition, you're going to have, like, more events. And given that we don't have, there isn't a lot of money in the sport, we're going to have to keep relying on national federations or private hosts or partnership development to be able to fund events like this. And we're at some point we're going to have to say, okay, well, there's a limit to the number of events we're going to have, and there's going to be a limit on the number of teams that can participate, just to make it manageable, right? Manageable for the host, and then manageable for the programs themselves, who, like, national programs, it's not like they have a lot of money where they can keep sending teams to all these different events and all these different circumstances. So I have to
Mhm.
balance that as well.
All right. Yeah, definitely. So going back to the current situation, can you give us more specifics on where we currently stand? So obviously there were three contendants. I think is it fine to say those countries
Uh,
who are currently in contention?
yeah, I mean, I think I think people in the community have there's a lot of conversation about it, but it was Malaysia, Argentina, and Saudi Arabia were the three countries that put in bids. There
Hmm.
were none of the bids. I mean, the bids were all good. Like the bids were all good. The bids all kind of addressed the things we wanted to address, and some bids addressed them more than others. Some bids focused on A, some bids focused on B. So the issue right now is trying to figure out. Uh, we know which bid scored the best on the board, um, but there's also a lot that goes into kind of being able to host a competition, and so those are a lot of the things that we continue to work on to make sure that everything is validated and that we've got what happens if that doesn't work out, or what happens if none of them work out, which is not out of the realm of possibility, and then where do we go from there. So I think, like, in terms of concrete information around the bids, I think we'll have more that we can share later this month, and give a bit more detail around that.
Hmm. Okay, but can you give us a little bit more detail regarding the different application processes,
Yep.
or maybe why is it still so difficult? Is it just because we have to vet the checklists, and is it still
Yep.
that all three of them
It's
are in the race, or
well, I mean, I wouldn't say that all three of them in the race at this point. I would say, like, there's like a clear leader in terms of the checklist, the requirements. But yes, they have to be vetted. Uh, like I said, there's still internal approval processes that are out of our control. That there's nothing, like, we have to kind of wait for those internal approval processes to be made and to come back to us. Um, and then at that case, then we have to decide whether or not to proceed once everything's been checked off. Um, the and again, like the bid, like all the federations have the bids, so they're there to be kind of shared. If someone wants to look through them and see like what the questions are being asked, but for in terms of like the general idea of when you select any host, right? The first thing I won't say the first thing, because I won't say these are in order, but there's kind of like different circles of um, criteria, qualifications that have to be met. So the first one, of course, is having, like, you need a host that's supported by a dodgeball community, that's familiar with the sport, that understands what's required, and that is capable of hosting the event. So they have to be capable not only from a financial perspective. Um, they have to be able to fund the event, they have to be able to put on, but they have to have a community where they can draw um, volunteers. They have to have a community where they could draw resources, because as you probably know, again, you said, like, being kind of close to the situation, but for anyone listening that's put on a big event, a big tournament, you have to be able to draw from volunteers and resources to actually host it. The second big circle is, of course, like the facilities and amenities. You need to be able to have facilities that are suitable, that are safe, that have the proper flooring. I mean, probably anyone listening to this remembers how hot Graz was in both venues, and how Blue Box was incredibly hot. There was a lot of concerns from athletes after that, and so one of the things that we built into the bid was, better climate control. And what do you do if it's air conditioning and it breaks, or what do you do if it's a colder climate and heat breaks? Like, what's your backup plan? What's your plan for that? And so those are, that kind of another batch of considerations. Like, we have to go to a country where they can actually have the facilities. They have a variety of hotels, levels of accommodations, cost wise. You can travel and get there with a certain amount of ease. Like, you don't have to take 3 flights to get there. And then, kind of like the third circle is accessibility. So our sport is, there's a women's division and men's and a mixed, and any country hosting that has to accommodate it. We have our own policies and procedures around um, uh, player equity, player accessibility, code of conduct. We have our transgender policy. Those policies are immutable, like they have to be respected. So a country has to say, yep, this is the way it's going to be. This is what we accept. And then the last kind of circle, and the one that we've been struggling with tremendously, not that we haven't had struggles in the other circles we have, but the circle we've struggled with tremendously is the accessibility for countries. There's a massive discrepancy in the countries that can freely travel and enter other countries and participate, and those that can't. And in the early years, because our circle was so small, and we were talking about 78 countries, we didn't run into that a lot. But as time's gone by, it's become a bigger problem. It was a significant problem in Mexico in 2019. It was a big problem in 22 and a very big problem in 24. And so that's kind of the other of those four buckets that we need to make sure that a host country can address. And finding, those they don't create a lot of Venn diagrams in those circles. I mean, they don't necessarily overlap to a spot where you have like 5 or 6 countries in the middle of those 4 circles where you've got that choice. They tend to be kind of all over. And so trying to find a country that does all 4 of those, or can demonstrate all 4 of those, or can, make an argument about all 4 of those, or that's what we strive to ideally find in a host.
Mm.
Um, yeah, and I don't mind saying, because I was with Dodgeball Canada at the time when we brought it to Edmonton. I thought the facilities in Edmonton, I mean, I would say the facilities in Edmonton were good. I think we had good facilities there. I
Yep.
think they were spacious. I think the floors were good. I mean, there was some issues. Some athletes didn't like the lighting, or the air circulation wasn't great. But I think generally speaking, the facilities were good. Um, and we had a good community in Edmonton, a good community in Canada as a whole. We had a big problem with countries not being able to attend. In 22, and we had that same problem in 24. We, of course, in 24, everybody knows we had some of the issues around venue. So it's trying to, like, you know f- find some place where we can do the most in the most areas, and that's a massive
Mm.
challenge. I was going to say, and it's a challenge for an unfunded, unsupported sport, because it's not just the funding, but unless a prospective host has government, Olympic Committee, National Sports Authority, also government, of course, unless they get behind a bid or a project, it's hard to achieve a lot of those things, right? It's easier to
Mm.
achieve 1 or 2 or 3, but it's really hard to achieve 4.
Yeah. So pretty much like the facilities now obviously are a big issue for the athletes, but probably the easiest thing and probably the most non-negotiable. So you have to have facilities that
Yeah,
can host that sort of level of sports, and that's pretty much something you probably can't really negotiate. Obviously, you need to have some sort of structure and some sort of community that you can even
yeah,
think about hosting that event. And then obviously, so basically the other 2 circles are the ones that we are mostly concerned for this election, I guess. And so can you give me a few numbers for the last 2 events? Like in Canada, I don't know, you said 60 teams participated.
yeah, yeah,
How many nations were there, and how many nations couldn't come because of
yeah.
whatever reason?
So in Canada we had 60, like I want to say 67, 65, but one of those 2 numbers. We had 15 countries participate. That included Argentina, that sent a ref, but it was 14 countries participating on the court. We had 7 that could not come because of visas. Now, I would say of those 7, probably 4 of them were sending one team, and then 3 of those countries were sending multiple teams. But we figure in that case, there were probably about 100 athletes that couldn't go, 100 participants that couldn't make it. And then in Graz, we had, I believe it was 12 countries that couldn't make it, but that included several that were bringing 6 teams. And so
Mm.
it was probably over 200. I mean, it's hard to say exactly how many people, like, didn't participate because of that, but probably it was over 200 for sure. that couldn't join.
Yeah, I only know I talked to Max, and I think for Egypt they tried to bring around 40 or 50 people, and they
Yeah.
managed to get visas for 13 in the
Yes.
end,
And
if that is correct.
India registered 6 teams and got nobody, nobody. And for India, it was
Not a
really
single person.
not a single. I mean, it's possible that there were people that did get their visas
Yeah.
approved but they couldn't field the team, and even the executives couldn't come. And it was, I mean, for India, it was a big issue for India. And it was a big conversation because for India, they spent a lot of money beforehand. And I think it ended up being a total of about $40,000 USD that they spent on setting up and doing what they had to do to get here, and then they couldn't come, right? And so
Mhm.
the added frustration I think for them was that there was lots of like parents and spouses that had booked their tickets or that had taken time off and they couldn't come. So and I and if if I may, I kind of want to talk a bit about like, when you talk about India spending that money and are prepping to come and what's involved, because I think that, in talking to certainly like in Canada, when we kind of talk about the visa process, it's a very different conversation, right? So when Canadian athletes go to Graz, they have to take time off work and maybe they don't have time and they've got to take unpaid leave maybe, and they have to pay for their flights and their hotels. And Dodgeball Canada, certainly in the years that I was there, we didn't have the funds to support athletes. Like you might support coaches to a small degree, or you might be able to help with something. But generally speaking, it's athlete funded, and I think that's for most programs in the world are kind of self-funded participation. But for a country like, I mean, India actually isn't as bad in the sense that their visa processes are more direct. But for a lot of the countries that didn't participate in Canada or in Graz, the visa process is a lot more complicated, right? So if you're, and I talked to some federations, and I'll be repeating myself for them, but just for people who kind of like aren't as familiar with the process. So if you live in a country like Sierra Leone and you want to come to Canada for an event, to begin with, there's no embassy for Canada in Freetown, so you have to travel, and I think you have to go to Dakar, Senegal, to do this. But you have to like travel, you have to go to the embassy, and you have to submit your papers. That means probably taking time off work, and in a lot of countries uh, around the world, not that includes Asia and South America, they don't have those like holidays, right? So you don't get like necessarily like 3 weeks holidays or so. So people take time off work, they take unpaid time off work, or what little time they have, they travel, which is a cost to travel, a cost to actually get there. They have to submit several different things in order to begin the application process. So they have to submit uh, proof of employment or proof of being a student, being proof of enrollment or proof of employment to show that they've got a job, they've got something that they're going to come back to. They have to submit their financials. So they need to show how much money they have in the bank, or how much money they have access to, so that the country can decide if they can support themselves while they're here. Uh, they have to demonstrate a lease or a mortgage or something to show that there's a residency that's permanent and ongoing, or ongoing, I guess, and not so permanent. So they have to submit that as well. They have to submit their hotel reservations, so they have to kind of book those in advance to show that they've got a place to stay. And then there's kind of the double-edged sword where, like I know in Canada, if you're applying for a visa, immigration will say to you, don't reserve your flight because you might not get approved. But I also know uh, firsthand that they want you to show a flight because they want to see that you're going there on the 12th and you're going home on the 17th, right? And so those are massive expenses for those countries. Now, if you're applying for a visa in Canada, you have to give yourself, I mean, on the short side, it's 2 or 3 months, but on the long side, or the more likely side, it's 6+ months. So these are all things that you have to do well in advance. So the other side of it is those programs are picking their teams well in advance, and those people are having to give notice at work or make their arrangements well in advance. And it's kind of an irony because and this is all, we're all talking about applying for the visa. Like we're not talking about anything else at this
Uh,
point, right? This is just getting to a point where you are asking permission to come into the country. This, you have to do all this, and there's a cost to doing all this. And the irony of it is that a lot of countries that have those systems in place are doing so because of the economies of the applicants. But yet the burden on the applicant to demonstrate is a massive cost in and of itself. So
mm,
you might have someone that's paying a month plus worth of their wages just to start that process off, like let alone to what comes in after that. And what we have found, and so with India, that was a lot of where those costs were. But India, of course, they do have an embassy in Canada. They do have some systems in place that do make it a bit easier. And historically, people from India have been able to um, travel to the United States, Canada, and Europe without too much problem. So it was very unexpected that that happened at that level. But for the other countries that got denied, that's not the first or second or third time for a lot of them, right? And so
mm,
that's kind of like that extra burden that they have, that countries with stronger passports don't have. And the ability for someone in Canada to go attend an event in Australia or Austria or Great Britain or Mexico is a passport in a suitcase, and what, starting next year, an electronic authorization form that you do online. But the burden for any other country to kind of do those things is a lot higher, like for our visa
mhm.
countries.
So yeah, so when we think about that circle in particular, those three countries, are they very different in that regard?
Uh,
Like Malaysia, Argentina, and Saudi?
well, yes, yes, they are. So I would say, Argentina's rules around like the countries that are visa qualified and not visa qualified are pretty similar to other Western countries. Um, Saudi Arabia has, they also have their list of approved countries, but the difference is that if the Saudi Olympic Committee approves the event, then the Saudi Dodgeball Federation can manage the visas directly. And that's something that we've
Mm,
never had access to before. In Malaysia, the access issue is better than in say Canada, the United States, or Europe, because Malaysia is predominantly Muslim country. So a lot of Muslim countries that often are restricted by to travel, heavily restricted, they wouldn't have those barriers with Malaysia, right? So
mhm,
there might still be other barriers for other countries, but in the sense of historically um, excluded countries like say Pakistan or whatever, they would be able to kind of travel to Malaysia. So there's a significant difference between the three of them.
mhm.
Yeah.
Okay. And so, what is basically, so obviously it will be nice and understandable that it would be good for dodgeball, or it would be just on a humane level good that everyone who wants to enter those tournaments can do so. But why is it so important for dodgeball as a whole? Or why is it so important for the WTBF
Yeah.
to host world championships where everyone can enter?
Yeah, it's, well, I mean, it's, if if the sport is going to grow and succeed, it's got to be supported by the national federations. The national federations have to have a path forward, and they have to be included. Um, you know, Listen, we've had issues with visas and accessibility to nations since day one. And like I said, when it was a smaller group, you didn't notice it as much. But now that the group is bigger, you notice it a lot. And this isn't a new issue, right? This is a new issue. Like if you're a country, like I'm going to use, I'll use Liberia as an example because they're a relatively new organization, but Liberia has built themselves up from nothing in a very, very short time. And next year, they're going to be introducing programs where they're going to be going to schools. So I think they start off with like 13 or 18 schools, and they're going to build their programs from there. And it's not a country with a lot of money. It's not a country with a lot of resources, but they've been able to get some funding if they can prove that they're serious about their path forward. And that's something that exists in a lot of countries. So for them to be able to build the sport locally, they have to demonstrate that they're legitimate. And the way that a lot of governments see legitimacy is you participate in an international federation. I mean, even in Canada or Australia, like if you want to go down a path where you become recognized, you have to belong to an international organization. That is also like certainly you have to belong to an international organization, but often you have to belong to one that's also recognized. So there's an interplay. Like we as a sport need national federations to be active and to grow and to have a process and a path and recognize. And then we also need to be able to do that as well. So we can't have a situation like, I mean, what's happened with some of our countries is they've been denied access 6, 7, 8 times. And it's really hard to sustain. And in the case of the country I'm thinking of, like they've done a really good job at being able to sustain some momentum and to sustain, you know, um, participation in their country. But it's really difficult to kind of have that if the idea is that the door is never going to be open for you. Like if you're never allowed to play with everyone else, if you're never welcomed to the party, at some point you're going to say, well, what are we doing this for? Like, and you might still locally have a good community and decide like the sport for the sake of sport, community for the sake of community. But in terms of like developing the sport um, on an international level or growing it at a national level with the expectations of what your national sports authority wants or your Olympic committee wants, you have to participate internationally. And having a situation where countries that are willing and able to participate is paramount to any national. I mean, you couldn't, it would be, and this does happen in other sports, but you wouldn't want to see like the World Track and Field Championships, where historically you've had really strong teams from, Ethiopia and Kenya in distance running, or, Nigeria in sprints, and you wouldn't want a case where all of a sudden like those countries just couldn't participate because of visa issues. Now, that's not an issue for a big sport like athletics, or it's not as much of an issue. But for us, it's a major issue right now. So we're at a point right now where the door is closed for over half of our countries when you think about it, like when you look at the number of countries that are currently members. And it's something that we have to rectify.
Mm. Okay. So that is obviously a very huge, important part for the upcoming worlds. So what then we have the other, the last circle of that. What was the last circle? Basically,
So players,
politically.
yeah, players need to feel like they're included. Players need to feel like they're safe. Players need to feel like they're welcome.
Mm,
And that's not a negotiable piece. Now, listen, like different countries have different rules and different laws, and we all know that like part of the conversations we've talked about is the way things are done in Europe is going to be different than how they're done in the Middle East, different than they're done in Africa, different than they're done in North America, with obviously some overlap and some things that are different and some things that are the same. But for us, like anybody who hosts the Worlds has to, and again, immutable part of the bid, has to respect the fact that there is going to be, without question, a women's division, a mixed division, a men's division. There's going to be, without question, accessibility, regardless of race, religious belief, sexual orientation, uh, sexual identity, um, ability in terms of like physical ability or cognitive, like all those things are immutable. That the access has to be there. The policies that we have are the policies that the host nation has to follow. Now, governments and federations aren't the same thing, right? And so what we need to do is if any federation puts up their hand and says that they want to be a part of the bid, or they want to host the world, they have to be prepared to host the world. There isn't you can't pick and choose. And we know that I mean, without getting into detail, in the past we've had countries come to us and say, well, we want to host, but we won't allow these countries in. And I don't mean from a visa point, and I want to continue that discussion, but I'm talking about from a political relationship point of view. And it's like,
mm,
okay, well, that's not going to work. I mean, now if that country is suspended from the IOC or suspended from the WDBF for whatever reason, that's a different story, right? But you can't say,
mm,
well, Canada's going to host, but we don't want the US here because we just don't want them. Like that kind of thing can happen. So if you're putting up your hand to host, you have to be prepared to take on what national federations members choose to go and who they choose to bring as their participants in their team, because that authority lies entirely with them. So that still
Mhm.
remains as something that has to be done regardless.
Mhm. And where are we with that, with the current host applications?
So all the host applications have, in terms of both those circles, right? All the host applications
Mhm.
have agreed to uh, work to facilitate visas, work to facilitate the entry from countries. They know which countries have historically not been able to participate and the issues around that. And all those countries, of course, they step up and they say, we're going to pledge to do what we can to make that work. And the other side of the fence is the same thing. All the countries have said, we accept the WDBF's policies. We accept any athlete that chooses to participate. They will be, everyone's allowed in and everyone will be looked after and everyone is committed to that. Now, this goes back to the beginning of our conversation, right? Anyone can say those things, but then you've got to figure out, okay, which of those things are actually possible and which of those things are actually going to be honored. And so that's a part of the work. And again, when you take a while to kind of look through the bids and to go back and forth, it's to see, okay, if a country says that they're going to do something, is the confidence level there that they're going to? And so how do you validate that? Well, one thing you do is you reach out to organizations directly. You reach out to other organizations that have participated. You look at the history. You look at, um, you know, personal history that you might have or history of other events or organizations, and you reach out and you have discussions to see, were those things honored? How hard were those things to do? What were the experience of those things? And that's part of what the work in progress is for us right now.
Mhm. Okay. And how many like really important points are still missing where you don't have the final check on the checklist? Because one
Yeah,
month isn't that long in
yeah.
terms of those kind of decisions.
So what we're waiting for, yeah, no, fair point. What we're waiting for is there's the work that we're doing with organizations to make sure that we have information that we trust and value and verify. And then we're waiting for host organizations to give us like official wording and official confirmation and something in writing that comes from um, comes from a source that can again be validated and becomes clear. So that's
Mhm.
and we've been, and I mean the hold up right now is not that piece. That piece is kind of, we've already received um, parts around that piece, but we continue to do kind of our own work to make sure this is true. I mean, one of the things that I mentioned was the visas. We keep going back to prospective hosts to say, like, are we sure about this? Like, what is going to be required? Like, you don't want to get, because I'll tell you what's happened in the past, right? What's happened in the past for us is, uh, I'll use the World Youth Open as example in Canada. So after trying to navigate visa processes in the United States and then Mexico and then Canada and then Austria, and it being a very bad experience for athletes, like a very bad experience for some countries. When we hosted the World Youth Open in Canada, and we've tried different things every time. Like we've moved from trying to get support from local authorities, and then I think in Canada in 22 we had the Minister of Tourism and Culture write an endorsement letter, like naming the countries, saying, we're welcoming these countries to Canada for this event. We look forward to it, all that kind of thing. We got the municipality to do it. We got a letter from Canadian Border Services giving the event a code, so that, and then the athletes got a letter so that you had that letter that you can include in your package to say, this is a real thing that I'm doing. Like I'm coming from this country to visit Canada and this is what it's for. So they got that in the package. Still uh, didn't work out well. And then for Austria, we kind of went one level up and we had a contact, I believe, like Max had a contact at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs that was going to help kind of like when visas came in, applications came in, to kind of not, but to validate there was an event. And again, we had letters from Graz, the municipality of Graz. We had letters from the WDBF and everything. and that didn't work. So when we got to the World Youth Open, we took it up to the next level, which was we worked directly with Canadian Customs and Immigration. We had an officer that was assigned to us. We had a spreadsheet that literally, when you sent me your visa application, I would put your name on the thing and who you were and where you're from, so that when you applied, they could say, oh, okay, this matches up. We had to send them samples of the letters that we sent to, like the invitation letters, the validation letters. So again, no one could forge it. You couldn't make it up and say, "Oh, I'm supposed to be there," when you weren't. Like everything
Mm.
was like we had half a dozen steps, and we still got visas denied. We still got a visa denied with someone at the airport wasn't allowed to board the plane, even though all the steps had been followed. Right. So we still had that. The reason I bring those up is to say that even though a country says, oh, visas, that won't be a problem, we know from experience they're absolutely a problem. Even when you get support from the government, even when you get support from the higher levels, right? It's been a problem. And so, similarly, if a country says, oh, well, we welcome anybody, it's like, okay, but do you? And can we validate that? Can we speak to people who've been there before? What was their experience like? Did they feel unsafe? Did they feel unwelcome? Did they have issues? So until those things, and I'm not saying we haven't validated any of that. I'm not saying it's happening this month, but I'm saying like those are all pieces that continue. Like, you have some validations, you try to have more, you try to have whatever you can in writing, and you want to make sure that if you make decisions based on A, B, C, D, that those decisions actually have, like, they actually follow through. And then you don't get to a point where it's like, well, we chose you because of these reasons, and now these reasons aren't applying, and then that would obviously be a problem. So that's part of what takes the process along, and making sure that we want to do those things
Mm.
properly.
Mm. Okay. But, and still in the end, you will never be 100% sure, because even you did a lot of steps before and thought probably that it was a good process, and in the end, it didn't work out. So probably it's going to happen again, and you're
Yeah.
going to learn from this experience. So at some point, you still have to make a decision, even though
Yes.
you
Yes.
will probably never get the final pardon from the president that everyone comes in on the
Well, or
airplane in the end.
or for everything, right? Like, I mean, the venues get booked, you see the venues, you talk to people who've been there, but at the end of the day, is that the week that, again, like I said, like, does the air conditioning go out? Or, you know, uh,
Mm.
we had this was kind of in our past. We had an issue. This is such a weird issue, but it happened where a venue had been booked, a really good venue. It was a former, like, top tier world class venue. And in the period of time that the venue was booked to where we had the competition, the owner of the venue got into financial trouble. There was a very messy takeover of the venue by the local community, local government, and the venue was kind of vandalized before the event. And so, like, the bathrooms weren't working properly, and there were some issues with the flooring. And it was not the host's fault, because like, the venue was set to go and it was great. And then, these things happen in between. So those things like that can always happen. But what you want to do is mitigate
Right.
as best you can. Like, in the case of, I mean, if we went to a country and the country said, well, the visa support is going to be um, apply, good luck, then that wouldn't be enough.
Mm.
You kind of need people to step in and say, okay, well, this is what we're going to do. The same thing with anything, right? Like, we need to know hotels. We need lists of hotels. We need, that has to be validated. And then you make the decision as best you can based on the information you have.
Mhm. So, with all that in regard, what's your current best guess between Saudi Arabia and Argentina regarding that circle? What's your best guess? Obviously, you could be wrong. How
Well,
many countries wouldn't be allowed in
yeah, I,
Argentina or Saudi Arabia?
I mean, on that question, I think Saudi would be in a position to manage their own visas. And if the Saudi Federation, as a federation, can manage the visa process and do that themselves, then that would be something we've never had before. We've never had anything close like that
Mm.
before. We've the furthest that we've ever been involved in a visa application process in the past has been, again, to have like a contact in the ministry or to write letters on their behalf. There have been times where, as a federation, we get asked for our financials. So, they might come and say, well, this person's coming into the country, but what happens if they can't pay for themselves? Can you do anything? And sometimes we can say, well, okay, here's the hotels we can offer, or here's what we can do. Financially, a lot of times we're not in a position where we can do it too much, but sometimes we can do, like for a ref or something, we might be able to do something. So we've never had that before, and that makes things entirely different for the experience of those countries that have never played, right? Like the idea that after how many years you have some countries that have never been played, they've been denied year after year after year, and they finally get a chance to play. I mean, that's a I can't convey how important that is for the people in that community and the people in those countries that have just not been welcome before. Like they've just not been able to play,
Mm.
and to have that opportunity is a game changer, certainly for them in that respect.
Okay, so basically Saudi Arabia meets 3 circles out of 4 because probably they have the funding and the facilities. They apparently have the community as well and the staff, and they have the visas in order. So we have one last circle to cross. How are we on that front?
I mean, like I said, for any country, whether it doesn't matter the country, um, they have to guarantee access to all of our athletes. They have to guarantee that there will be nothing discriminatory against our athletes. Now, countries in the Middle East, countries in parts of Asia, countries in parts of Africa, every country has restrictions on, um, you know, what can be said and what can be done and what can be displayed. And we know there's big differences in the world. Like there's big differences all around the world. But in terms of like access, like all athletes have to be given access. All athletes have to be welcome to participate. All countries have to be free to choose their own teams, and the policies that we've established as the WDBF have to be um, applied and respected, and that's immutable, right? So,
Mm.
if a country in the Middle East were to host, if Pakistan or Malaysia or Indonesia were to host, they would have to do those things. If they can't do those things, then they can't host. So that's not negotiable, right? Like that's something that has to happen. Now, the laws in different countries, they're not going to change for an event, right? Uh, Anywhere, and we know that. But what we hope for is that our athletes are welcome, that they're safe, that they're able to participate, and that what we want to see happen is a situation being better because of it, right? Um,
Mm.
and that and I mean, when you're a global organization, you've got so many different countries with so many that are in so many different positions of their social experience, right? There's a lot of the, the social experience that you get in Austria is not going to be the same as you get in India, and it's not going to be the same as you get in Rwanda, and it's not going to be the same as you get in Mexico, right? But what we want for an event is like our athletes have to be, uh, they have to be um, uh, allowed to participate, welcome to participate. They have to expect the same level of security as anyone else, and they have to be, um, uh, able to be a part of the event as we've deemed it, as we've structured it, and as the policies apply. And that's not
Mm.
an option.
Mm. And how do we stand on that front? Because that's a non-negotiable. So are those criteria being met, or is that currently still under investigation?
No, it's. I mean, the criteria is being met uh, from all three. Like that's the position is that they're ready and willing and able to meet those criteria. What we want to do in any situation is, of course, we have conversations with other sports federations. We have conversations with uh, um, related to other events that have been hosted, and we want to make sure, like with anything else, that when you say you get visa access, when you say you've got a good venue, when you say that's actually the case.
Mhm. Okay. Yeah, I mean that's all completely sensible and understandable, I think, or at least from my perspective. So, um, still trying to be as specific as possible.
Yeah.
So we had the checklist. The checklist, one country apparently did better in those checklists for this event than the others, which I believe is Saudi Arabia, and you can deny or confirm or whatever. So, and we have those 4 circles, and we can say, okay, all of the countries in some way um, meet the requirements, but visa is a very important issue, and we have one country that definitely seems to meet those criteria better than anyone ever before. So, what's the holdup? Why hasn't there been a decision to host the next World Championships in Saudi
Yeah.
Arabia?
Well, just like as I said before, there's like internal processes that have to happen. There's internal confirmations that have to be given, and as in the past, if a host is making a proposal that's related to a grant, if they're making a proposal that's contingent on a venue that hasn't been solidified, there are still things outstanding that have to be confirmed before we move in any direction, right? And that's, and again, as I said, in the past, it's been easier because if there's one country that's put their hand up, you've done that. And then the second thing you've done is have a backup plan. Okay, so we can announce
Mm.
Austria, but if something happens and Austria is not possible, then what do we do? In this case, because we've got more than one group on the go, we want to make sure that they're confirmed on the inside, we're confirmed on the outside, but before we make that final decision and that contract.
Mm.
And then that contract
Mm.
still has to be
Okay.
done. Like, regardless of who you pick, we still have to get to a point where we sit down and say, well, now we're going to put this in writing of what's happening. And then at that point in time, you could find that again, like if there's a disagreement or if there's just something that becomes untenable, then it's untenable.
Yeah. So, but that's what I'm partly want to get at. So, whether it's end of September, end of August, end of October,
Yeah.
there will be some
Yes.
uncertainties left, and still options for failure, basically, and stuff that can't work out. But in the end, the event will be in around a year,
Hmm.
and the
Yeah.
closer it gets, the harder it's for everyone who wants to participate, and which in this case are very, very many people apparently, and everyone is self-funded more or less, so
Yes.
it's also a struggle for every individual to get there. So at what point do you say, okay, we just have to make a decision whether we know everything or not, but to even make it possible for athletes to attend?
Yeah. And I mean, I think it has to be this. Like, if you look at, I mean, it's hard to say, for instance, on an individual level, like how much time a specific person needs to kind of plan, right? In terms of like taking time off work or saving money or that sort of thing. The time frame, like I said, we can commit to is the end of November. I mean, we can commit to that time frame, give or take a week, regardless. So that much we could say for sure. Um, the accommodations wherever we go, we're going to aim at the a level that you've seen in past world championships. I mean, they were they get a little more expensive as each year goes by. Unfortunately, we've kind of seen that trend, but we commit to that kind of a same cost. So it's kind of like booking the ticket and where it is that you're going to go if you go. And in that case, yes, we do need to let people know. In the old days, we kind of had the luxury, not the luxury, but because we would do them every year, people would really never have more than 8 months notice to 10 months notice on the next worlds. So we've tried to make that a bit better, but obviously we're we're below what we wanted to. We wanted to give people kind of a good solid year and a half. We're not going to be a year and a half, but we'll still be a little bit over a year when everything is finalized. So hopefully that's enough notice for people to plan and prepare.
Mhm. Okay. So then another aspect of the whole thing is that you obviously have the part of the host nation and them fulfilling all the requirements, but then again you have all the participating nations and the
Hmm.
board members and stuff like that, and community members who have to be willing to go to that location as well. And I think that seems to be a bit of an issue in this
Yeah.
case, where the host seems to meet pretty much all of the requirements, but it's still kind of a balance between maybe two um, I don't want to say two evils, but like two situations that are both not optimal for everyone
Mhm.
involved. So obviously the community is that big and heterogenic that it's very probably impossible to meet everyone's requirements and everyone's um, particular wishes. But then with this selection process, you have 10 board members who basically decide, and um, there seems to be not just a problem from the host nation, and this is probably more regarding Saudi Arabia, but also participating nations willing to go to those events if they happen to be at one event or another. So how does it look on that front, and what are the current struggles on that side, from your opinion?
Mhm. So, I mean, first of all, I think with any world championships, I mean, members decide to participate if they choose and if they can, right? And we've seen kind of cases in the past where there are different reasons why members aren't there. They may choose not to go. It may not be affordable. It may not be an option that they can afford. It may be because they can't go. There's different reasons, and I think at the end of the day, each federation will make its own decision on what to do, and just as players will, right? Just as players will make their own decisions, and of course that's expected, and it's exactly the way it should be. I mean, people have the choice that they have to make. um I think for us, it's a matter of like, what choice can we make where the most amount of people can be there? Like it's I, I just want to be honest, like, we haven't been inclusive, like, as a sport, as WDBF, we haven't been. I mean, it's a topic that we're talking about now, and I completely understand why. But in the past, we haven't. When we were in Canada, like I said, we had 7 countries, right? 100 people or so plus who weren't welcome. They couldn't go. Like, they weren't allowed to go. They weren't welcomed in the country. They couldn't be there. And after that event, Pierre Corvalec and I, and Pierre was the Secretary General and also board member with the DDF. We had a conference call with the nations that couldn't go. This was leading up until the event, so we were a few days from the event, and there was a lot of visas denied, and we were starting our appeals processes, but we weren't getting anywhere with them. And so we had a conversation with those countries. Uh, I mean, it wasn't a pleasant conversation. Like, it was a bad experience for them. It's a bad feeling for their athletes. It's a bad feeling for athletes who have, you know, uh, worked really hard, raised money, tried to adjust their schedules, tried to get time to go, tried to get the ability to go, and then couldn't, and got denied to go. Right, and they're not denied because they they don't have the funding. They're not denied because they don't have the teams. They're denied because they're not allowed in. They're not allowed to play. And so the conversations after Edmonton were very difficult. And so leading up to Graz, like I said, we tried to do more, and we tried to kind of take things to a different step to try to make that easier. And then at that point in time, I think the number I had was like 12 countries that couldn't go, and then we're talking for
Mm.
so that has been the case for years. Like, and we didn't choose Canada with that in mind. Obviously, we didn't choose Austria with that in mind. Obviously, but we knew in choosing Canada that it would be very difficult for those countries to go. We knew in choosing Austria that it would be very difficult for those countries to go, which was the same thing when we chose the US and when we chose Australia years ago. We know it's going to be hard for those countries to go. And what we've kind of done is, okay, well, what can we do on the back end? Like, how can we work with the government? How can we work with the municipality? Is there a politician that will, like, stand up and help us, right? Is there something that we can do that way? And we just haven't been successful. Like, so for Graz, again, like, you've got 12 countries, you've got a couple hundred athletes, and they're not able to go. And so at some point, that has to, like, it's not sustainable. We can't keep doing that. We can't keep holding events where a large group of people are categorically not allowed to go. And it's a and I mean, the visa process it's not just you apply and you get rejected. I mean, I could show you at some point Stefan, like the letter you get back says things like, "We don't think you have a reason to be here. We don't think you'll leave at the end. We don't think that you're able to sustain yourself." Like they're awful letters to get back. And again, if you're a country where you've been working for months and months to try to save money, to try to put yourself in a position to do this, and it's a monumental thing, and it's the first for your country to do this, or if you're a smaller country in Africa or a smaller country in Asia where this is like, this is news, like this is a big deal, and you go get to that level and you can't get in, and that's the response, and you spent all this time money, it's not only disheartening, but it's insulting, right? Like it's insulting. And the conversations we had after Edmonton, like when I say it wasn't a pleasant conversation, it's not a pleasant conversation because they're very angry, like they're very upset, and they want to know why we're not doing more. Like what more can we do? And as a sport that was maybe recognized, or there might be a time in the future where we have the ability to do more, but that time isn't now, right? And so you had that happen in Edmonton. You had the same thing in Graz, and the same conversations after Graz, and the same, like, I think anybody who was in Edmonton or Graz remembers how the schedule was delayed till the last minute, and how we didn't have a schedule for everything till last minute. And people were quite upset about that because of their lack of ability to plan. But that was because of like those schedules, because of countries that had committed, they had paid their fee, they had registered, and TikTok were waiting for visas, waiting for visas. Now you can close the door sooner. You can close the door a month in advance and say, sorry. But the truth is, because we've seen this happen, is visas get processed at the last minute, right? And if you're a country that's invested all kinds of time and all kinds of money into training, into your application, into your position, you don't want the federation to say, well, we're putting a time limit. And then what happens is 2 days later, if you get your applications approved, now it's more disheartening because you've gotten the approval, you've gotten the ability to go. And this is what we've experienced. Like there are countries that have been rejected 6 or 7 times in our world championships. And it's just not something that we can continue to do, right? And so, I mean, the most inclusive, if we're looking for an event with full inclusion, you would want in a perfect world, and we're not there yet, would be that everybody that, like, by definition, everybody invited can go. Like that would be the ideal inclusion. If you're invited and you're able to go, but that includes the layer of economic discrepancy, right? Because some countries are able to afford, some communities are better able to afford travel and to partake in an international event, and some countries, economically they struggle, and it's a bit different, and the disparity on the dollar, makes it difficult to do. So, I mean, if you want to, for us to be honestly, truthfully inclusive, you want to get to a point where, again, if you're invited, you can go, and money isn't the issue, and race or religion or identity isn't the issue, or the country you're from isn't the issue. That would be the ideal. I mean, that's where we want to get, ideally.
Mm, yeah, absolutely. And obviously, that's sort of utopia from today's point of view, but it's definitely the goal. So, what in your from your perspective are the next steps to take in towards that direction, and what is the right path or
Yeah.
one way to get closer to that
So
situation?
there's kind of like there's kind of like three paths, right? And two of them are closely related. So one path is having international events with biggest the broadest participation possible, because one of the things that we know this from experience is that if a country, let's say they don't get a visa, but then they do, and they get the visa, they get to go, they participate, the event happens, it's a good event, well done event, that delegation goes home, we know that the chances of them getting a visa again increase significantly, right? It doesn't become a guarantee, but increases significantly. So we saw that with the Ivory Coast. So the Ivory Coast tried to go to Edmonton in 22, they got denied. Then we appealed, and there was involvement. Anyway, there were some visas that were then granted. So then a delegation from the Ivory Coast came to Canada in 2023 to they did workshops, they did events with the local community. And then when 2024 came for Graz, they did get their visa applications and they did send teams and they were able to go, right? So that's a case where we know that once they kind of get their foot in the door and there's some validation there for travel, then the next trip becomes better. And then now you build up you build up a travel log, right? You build up a passport list. And so you get to a point where, okay, now you're able to do different events. So we know that it's very critical to kind of get that first event, that first international event, in the books for those participants, so they begin to build a travel log, a travel history. So that's one path, right? The other paths are, and I was saying like there's two, but they're related, which is the National Federation working towards recognition from its own government and its own sports authority, and the International Federation working towards international recognition as a sports authority. And those two things, when you can get the Olympic Committee involved, when you can get the Ministry of Sport involved, then things, maybe you get some leeway. Like Canada doesn't have team visas. So if a team wants to come to Canada, every single person has to apply individually. And that application is adjudicated, processed individually. But some countries have team visa processes. So you can say, well, here's the Austrian team, these 12 people, and then they can get approved in a block. But those applications generally happen through the support of a government body, right? So if Austria gets its certification, it gets more support from the ministry or the Olympic Committee. If WDBF gets its Sport Accord membership or its IOC membership, then it gets more support from those same organizations. So that's another way that we can start building that ability for a team from Bangladesh to come and play in Sweden, right? Like that becomes easier when any of those things are done. So that's so we're doing what we can on the path of recognition internationally, and we're exploring what we can do on the individual path of like individually building a travel history for players and coaches. Sorry, that was probably a longer answer, but
no, that's fair enough. So, but you said there were three paths, and you said so going through that path of international recognition and then feeding from there. Did you
the
get
third,
into the other paths as well?
yeah, so the national federation, right? So if the
Okay,
national,
so yeah,
yeah, and that's why I was saying they're connected, because
Mm.
let's say the WDBF doesn't get recognition, let's say dodgeball doesn't get recognition, but let's say one of the member organizations gets recognition, then they do have some support from their Ministry of Sport
Mm.
or their National Olympic Committee to say, no, we fully endorse this team, but we know that's not. I mean, there's lots of stories about teams like whether it was the Little League World Series in the United States, or uh, there was an exhibition for volleyball in Canada recently. Like there's lots of teams that still get denied visas. I mean, even recently in the news, a friend and I were kind of trading some stories about internet. It's getting worse. It's not getting better. Like the
Mm.
United States now has a defined list of countries that they won't allow to come in. They've
Yeah.
expanded that list where they're just not processing those visas. Period. Full stop. There's no now for the World Cup with the World Cup that they're hosting, the FIFA World Cup. Obviously, the athletes do have exceptions in those cases. Otherwise, they wouldn't be able to host. But visitors, won't be allowed to come, or friends or family delegates. So it's not getting better. It's getting worse, and
Mm.
it's something that I think our member organizations that have kind of been on the wrong side of that, like they know, but we it's not okay to just leave it as it is, right? So we have to figure out what is the way that we're going to address that from our point of view, from a federation point of view.
Mhm. Yep. I completely understand, agree, and yeah, it's not an easy decision to be made. So I think at this point, I just want to go through a few listener questions
Sure.
because they probably overlap a little bit, and some of the points we already got into. So we're just gonna try to stay as briefly on them as possible and try to be as fast on them. But some might be more important to go into depth.
Sure.
And most of them are concerning LGBTQ plus topics. Lots of them are concerned with Saudi Arabia being the proper one of the possibilities for being the next host. So I think I'll just gonna do a fast run through them, and you just answer what you can answer, and if not, we're just gonna skip to the next one if that's cool with
Yep.
you.
Yep. No, of course.
All right. Good. And I'm going to start. The WTBF has said that visa access was a major factor in considering Saudi Arabia as host for the World Championships. How do you respond to concerns that this simply shifts exclusion from one group of players to another, particularly LGBTQI plus athletes who may feel unsafe or unwelcome here?
Yeah. So in all honesty, I would say that I understand that, and it does shift. It does shift the impact of that from one group to another. What we want to do, so what we require, as I said before, is any player going to any host country has to be treated as all players. Like, they have to be guaranteed their safety. They have to be given access. They have to be, I mean, and if anything happens and there's medical attention required, like, there can't be any discrimination based on players. I mean, I understand the idea of that's not going to, I mean, that's cold comfort if you don't feel safe going, or if you don't feel welcome. From an access point of view, it's something that we would require of any country, that the access would be required. Does trying to address one issue create another one? I think it does. But that's the way that we would try to mitigate this, and to talk to other organizations and to get their experience. And I mean, when we have done that, and put the host organization on the spot on those issues, to get validation that access and safety is secured. The
Mhm.
But the other side of it, in terms of like the situation that exists now, with the list of countries that haven't been able to participate, I mean, they haven't had access. They've never been able to kind of be a part of that. And so this was seen as one way to resolve that, or one way to improve that access. And what we were doing was not sustainable. Like, we couldn't continue to hold events in countries that only allowed kind of like Western countries to attend. And one of the, when we talked about the circles, and I was saying that there isn't a Venn diagram, it's because a lot of countries where entry access is easier are often countries where social norms are a lot more restrictive, right? In the countries where you see a lot of progression in social values and social views are countries that are very restrictive in terms of entry. And so it's kind of like, so how do you make that Venn diagram? How do you create that common circle? And that's the
Mhm.
challenge. And that's the challenge.
Yeah. So we're gonna head into the next one, which sort of builds up on this one. One of Dodgeball's strongest values is inclusion and being yourself. How can the WDBF guarantee that players will truly feel safe and free to express who they are in Saudi Arabia beyond what's written in policy, beyond what is written in policy documents? No, that wasn't pronounced correctly, because how can they, yeah,
Yeah.
how can they basically express it beyond what is
So,
written?
yeah. And so, I mean, what I would say is, like, with any host that we choose, we will have agreements. We will have written agreements. We will have consultations with not only the federation, but with the government. We will have consultations legally to ensure that those guarantees are made and written and communicated. Um, I could never, we could never promise that someone won't have a bad experience in any country and anywhere. I mean, we could never promise that. We could never promise that safety will be guaranteed, to the sense of that there won't be something that happens. But what we do in any country is go in and again, like one of the things that we asked countries to give us was with their risk management plan. What happens if something goes wrong? Like what happens if there is an incident, right? And then in getting those assurances in writing and having a plan and having the host agree to the plan, I mean that's kind of the most we can do in any situation to ensure that the athletes are safe. We did talk about like, I mean, we do have the option. I mean, for any country, for any time we go someplace, is to, do like meet and greets with the embassies of countries if people want to kind of have a like a home base or like someplace that they're familiar with. We did talk about, somebody had made a really good suggestion about like having WDBF appointed, um, like maybe a WDBF person pairing up with a local host person as kind of like what's the word I'm looking for? Like not attaches, but like people to work with the groups, and um, provide oversight or help them navigate A to B or whatever. So I mean, there's those things we could do, but I would say like those are kind of the main things that we can introduce and work with the whoever the host is to get those guarantees.
Mm. Some players worry about dodgeball being used for sports washing by regimes that want to improve their global image. How do you balance the sports growth with the risk of being associated with countries whose values conflict with those of our community? An
It's
easy
yeah,
one.
yeah. It's no, but I mean, it's a real question. It's a good question. It's a question
It
that,
is, yeah.
yeah, like but if we were just talking about a sport growing, if the question is, how do you balance, right? So if you're just talking about sport growing,
Yeah.
there was a time, like I think nowadays, if you were going to say like which countries are important in the eyes of the IOC or in the eyes of like different international sports bodies, whether that's WADA or whether that's Sport Accord, what countries are kind of the big influential power players, right? And it's, I mean, United States has always been one of them. The UK has long been one of them. Italy has been one of them for ages and incredibly influential now. China has become a big player since the early 2000s, and Saudi Arabia has been a big player since the mid 2010s. And those are the countries that a lot of those organizations will look at and say, like, are you playing in that space? Are you like, what's your relationships? Um, and so, into that degree, those are kind of the countries that you're looking at in terms of like the sport validation and growth. How you balance it, I mean, in every case, what you want to do is you want to leave something behind, right? And you want to have an influence on the people that you touch, right? Like, what you hope is that, I mean, I can't, there's an example I don't want to use because it's with a specific country, but there have been times where, when you get people at your table, when you get people at the table and you have conversations about difficult issues, or you have or even just meeting someone that's not like you, meeting someone that thinks differently than you, um, there's an opportunity for growth. I mean, like things change because people have access. I mean, I remember being from a small town and going to university and meeting people who were different than me in 100 ways, and what a massive impact that had on me as a person. Because when you don't have exposure, when you don't have um, uh, any ability to connect with someone, you don't really have that chance to grow in that way. And so what you hope for is that any country, and our, I mean, our membership has all kinds of countries with all kinds of political views, and many of which people would say, I definitely don't agree with that. I definitely think that's wrong. But if people from those countries, if the people from those countries, right, if the athletes from those countries, if everyone gets a chance to meet each other and mix and forge relationships, then you hope that what you're delivering is the opportunity for some growth or some new thought or some questions, or just the thing of, geez, I didn't know that. You know what I mean? Like, and I think that's kind of what
Mhm.
you hope to achieve.
Yeah. I honestly, I love this answer because that's the thing I always think about, because we sort of easily exclude stuff that seems to go against our values, and that is sort of a privileged position where we're like, okay, we have those open values and we're very inclusive and everyone is welcome. But the truth is, as you said, in our very secluded part, that's the case. And it's really hard for other people with different opinions to actually access that kind of community and get sort of a feeling or a sense for those values as well. And I think the World Championships in Graz, there were some countries that haven't been previously to those events, and you could really see the differences in some situations. But you got to talk to different peoples who had a completely different um, upbringing, situation, and also a different understanding of the sport. And for me, always a very big part of dodgeball is the fair play character of the sport. And I think that is something that is so unique in that environment and so important for the sport, and something that is so amazing to transport out of the sport into the real world, where it's often not that big of an issue. And I felt that there were a few nations in Graz where we really got to communicate about those values and where we got to share our perspectives and maybe see different perspectives, for them, for us, something
Yeah.
to learn from. And so to exclude yourself from those situations, even though it could send the wrong impression, but I think if you are able as a community to still communicate that you stick to your values and that there are good reasons for your decisions, and then you try to bring a little bit of those values to communities that have harder access to it, then it might be worth it in the end as a balance, without using it to whitewash
Yeah,
anything.
and but just so I don't like to directly address that point. I mean,
Yeah,
I do think it happens. I do think it happens. Obviously, like I think
definitely. Yeah,
countries do use sport to increase. But I mean, it's not just. I mean, I know in the Middle East, with the different events that have been there, like the World Cup and the World Track and Field Athletics
yeah.
Championships. I know that there's that kind of view for sure. But I mean, any country who bids on the Olympics, any country who hosts the World Cup is doing to say, hey, look how capable we are, look how good we are. And there have been cases where we've seen the Olympics and the World Cup held in countries where, the population has suffered because of it. I mean, again, being a Canadian, I just pick on Canada, but I remember back in 1986, the Vancouver hosted the World Expo, which was still a thing at the time. I think that's long gone away. But they used to have these World Expos, right? I feel old explaining this. I don't know if anybody else is kind of familiar with it, but they would do these big expos. And when Vancouver hosted, I remember one of the things that happened was they they kicked a whole bunch of people out of like apartments, like low end apartments, and converted them to hotels so that they could accommodate the people that were coming to visit. And it's like, I mean, it's an awful thing to do, and it's doing it to try to elevate the global position of Vancouver as a city and Canada as a country. But so it's still sports washing, but in a different way, right? Like it's
Mm,
not related so much to political, but it's got a social impact that that wasn't a good thing.
yeah. And I think at some point, as you said, sports washing, that's definitely a thing, and that's something to be aware of. And that's something, if you decide on whatever host it's going to be, in the end, those are issues you're going to have to address in at some point in some
Absolutely.
way for the community and for also for the outside view. And but as you said, it's often better to not just acknowledge it, but also see there are balances and there are um, so many different views and variables in those scenarios, where there's always a lot of good, some bad, and we just have to see in the end that the good outweighs the bad, not just for us, not just for the players, not just for dodgeball, but for as big of a circle as is possible. And that in the end we'll see what it's going to be like, but without like hiding from the fact that it obviously has a definitely a sour side taste in most mouths, I think. All right, that wasn't fast on that question, but I think it's important, so we're just gonna
Sorry.
head on. No, not sorry at all. I think as long as you have time, I'm still here. So, if significant numbers of players or if even whole federations decide not to attend 2026 due to safety or principle, does the WDF see that as a failure of inclusion?
Yeah. Um,
That's a yes or no question.
yes. I mean, yeah, I'll say, well, honestly, I would say yes, but I would say, like, again, like, just to, we haven't been, like, was Graz a failure of inclusion because we couldn't get in 12 countries? Like, was Edmonton a failure of inclusion because we couldn't get those, like, we had, in those two events, we had one out of the, I think, I can't do a fast count, but I'm going to say, like, between the two, we were probably talking like, 7 or 8 of those African countries, 9 of those African countries, one got in for one event. So it wasn't
Uh,
inclusive. So we failed at being able to get them there. And so if people choose not to go, for the reasons you mentioned, or like, then yes. But I think getting to a fully inclusive state, as I said before, is going to be one where you're invited, you can go. That's the ultimate of where we're going to get to in terms of an inclusive community.
mm, good. And looking forward, do you see this Saudi decision, even though it's not a decision yet, but there are some informations around? So, decision as a one-off driven by the visa issue, or is this the direction Dodgeball will keep moving in when choosing future hosts?
Mhm.
I think you already answered it, but maybe just a quick
Yeah,
summary.
just to say that, like, those buckets we talked about, those circles, those are always going to be part of the decision
Uh,
making process. But again, like, building a visa history, building a travel history, I think is important. I think there are some decisions that facilitate being able to do that for athletes, and some that are going to continue to make it restrictive. But the hope, it's not always going to be that principle that drives things, but we have to allow that to happen. So the short answer is no, it's not always going to be driven by that, but yes, that's always going to be one of the factors. Accessibility is always going to be one of the factors in making a decision.
mm. A little bit of a different question. What financial commitment and volunteer resources are required to deliver a world championships at this point?
Yeah. So I think, I mean, I'm not going to speak for Austria in terms of their budget, but I mean, historically, even at much smaller events, we're looking anywhere from 60 to 125,000 USD on the low end. I don't know what
Mm,
Austria came in at like what the final totals were,
more, I
but
think.
obviously it was a much bigger event, right? So
Mm,
that's kind of like, I would say, like, going forward, the expectation of something in the range of 200,000 USD, I think, is probably fair. In terms of people, you're probably looking at minimum 30, upwards to 60 volunteers. So, like, it's a lot. It's a big lift, right? And what
mm,
we had as an issue in Canada is a lot of the people who were there, like, they're playing, right? So it's getting people from the community who aren't already playing or that don't want to be a spectator. So yeah. Anyway, that's the approximate commitment for both
mm.
those things.
Fair. Yeah, absolutely. So, also another direction, a more personal question: what does the criticism on Saudi Arabia as a potential host do to you as a person, as president of the WDBF?
Uh, it, this is not a good thing. Um, how can I put this? There are some things about this that are great, right? Like, there's some things that are awesome. You have a new federation join and they're super excited, or you have an event that goes off really well, and it's never perfect, and there's always going to be things that could be done better, but people are generally happy about it. Athletes celebrating their medals, or I mentioned Liberia. They just started in. We gave them like a tiny, tiny bit of funding so that they could take a bus from Liberia to Ivory Coast for 2 days and participate in the event. They ended up winning 2 bronze medals at the African Championships. Those things are awesome. They're amazing. They make you feel great. Um, Things like this, where the community is very upset, understandably so. about whatever it is not it. Yeah, it weighs on you. It's not pleasant. Um, Having conversations, knowing that people will come to their conclusions about you as a person, it's just it's the worst part of everything. But it is what it is. I mean, it is what it is. Like you have your beliefs as a person, but then you have your role as a president or deputy president or vice president, and you try to fulfill that role based on the commitment that you make to the organization and the membership. And then you have your own beliefs and your own conflicts, and you hope that you have enough people in your life that care about you, that you can make some peace with that.
Yeah, fair. Yeah, I think that is a really also important question, because it's something that often gets really overlooked, that there is always a person behind every position. And yeah, being the president, I think in no situation ever is easy. But if you don't, so basically do it for the community, and it's something where, as you said, if there good things happen and you feel part of something that moves the needle in the right direction for you, and is really making a lot of sense for you, then it can be really fulfilling. But it's still a lot of work and a lot of stuff that isn't really fulfilling in itself, and then you still have to deal with a lot of criticism. And that's also a part that we don't want to completely stop,
Yep.
because it's important to have feedback, and lots of
Yes,
those criticism are absolutely valid. So it's not that we don't want anyone to criticize people who have a certain position. So I think it's an important part,
of
but
course, of
to
course,
maybe
of
not
course.
forget that there is also a person behind that, and that there is always a way how you can maybe formulate your criticism in a way that is more constructive,
Yeah,
and not to be
yeah.
too personally painful.
No, and I do, and I have to say, like, I mean, doing this for a long, long time, generally people are, yeah, they'll send you an email, they'll tell you what they think. You're wrong, you're right. This was handled poorly. This was handled well. This is a bad decision. This is a good decision. Like, I think the community in general is people aren't afraid to speak their minds. People say what they feel, and I don't think anyone thinks that should stop. I mean, like we're going to be a better organization based on what we say in action than we would be if we just said, this is fine. And that applies, like, that's just not WD. I mean, that's EDF, that's British
Mm.
Dodgeball or USA Dodgeball or whatever, right? Like the more feedback you get, and I think generally speaking, the community says what they think, and it's the way it should be.
Absolutely. I think there's just sometimes, even in this small community, the social media bubble at some point gets a little bit of its attention seeking toxicity in as well in those situations. But I think, as you said, from personal experience, it's a community that is able to speak their mind freely and be very respectful about it. And there's still like the conversational base for everyone is pretty much on the same level. So I can just talk to the president if I meet you, and everyone's basically on a very similar basis, which is amazing for an organization which is really small when it comes to international sports organizations, but is really big when it comes to just the sheer size of countries and people that are involved. So I think that is something that we can really value, and that speaks for the, I think, health of the community as it stands. So saying that, we have a few more maybe not so nice formulated question, but I'm still gonna hit them at you. Is dodgeball an inclusive sport if this inclusivity is on an event by event basis?
Yeah, and I think this is, again, just to repeat, we haven't been
Yeah,
inclusive. We try,
yeah,
and there's a goal of what perfect inclusivity gets to, and I hope we get there. And I know we're not there yet. And I mean, I don't know what else to say other than what we've said. It's just like, I know, uh, you know,
absolutely.
we do have our values, but but we also know that inclusion in a practical sense is challenging. We know from experience it's challenging, and it's something that we haven't been able to do to the level that we wish we could.
In that sense, will WDBF stop doing pride posts now that they endorse anti-LGBTQ nation states?
So no, we won't stop doing pride posts. We are a member of the Federation of Gay Games. We continue to be. We did the we did the gay games for Guadalajara and Hong Kong in the recent past, where we introduced dodgeball. Both of those, I fully understand the view of how dare you, right? Or this is inconsistent. But what I can sincerely say is it, we've supported events in that community. We've worked with World Police and Fire Games, which is like first responders. We've done refugee programs. We continue to do a refugee program in Kenya and the Kakuma. We do try to do programs that touch on different things. We're just starting down the path of para dodgeball, right? To try to be inclusive and to get um, athletes. Like wheelchair dodgeball has been something that's happened only in a couple of countries. Um, we did a refugee program with Bangladesh, who also did para dodgeball at the same time. So there was something, so we're trying to do the different things um, to cast as broad a net as possible, but we understand fully the viewpoint that there are things that are incompatible. And as I mentioned earlier, the point is to be someplace where the most people can be there with valid assurances of safety and welcoming. And we're trying to do that. Um, but fully understand the position that there's a conflict in that. I get it.
Mm.
But no, we're not going to stop doing pride posts. We're not going to stop doing events.
Exactly. Yep, absolutely. So one doesn't um, cancel the other side. There are always more sides to everything. So should we separate the world champs cloth on one weekend and foam on another?
Oh, I mean, it's possible. I think when we first introduced cloth and foam together, we didn't talk about the weekend piece, but we did talk about like night and day. Like, do we do cloth in the morning and do we do foam in the evening? I think the feeling was we wanted them to be as concurrent as possible, so that at that time there were lots of countries only doing one or the other, and the idea was to try to get them to see the other format and maybe see if there was an interest. In Graz, we had different venues and there was a lot of issues around that. I understand. I don't know that we will separate them by weekend. I think that the amount of divisions and countries is going to mean that we're going to do like 4 days, 5 days of competition. So I think we're done with the days of two. So I don't think weekends work. I think there'll be overlap. And I think it's important to have all the medals on the same day because I think that's where you're going to generate most interest in viewership
Mm.
and so I don't think we're going to separate it like that. If there's a plan that logically makes sense to do that and it's supported by the members, then I think that's always something to look into, but there's no plan to do that.
Mm. Um, a different route. When will there be a junior world championships like the junior European
Yeah.
championships we just saw in Saragossa?
So there is talk about whether that's something we want to begin. So there's two things. It will happen. So there's a question of do we put it on an off year? Like, so do we have like worlds on an even year and then on an odd year we have juniors? Or do we combine juniors and seniors like with 1 week following the other? So similar to the question about cloth and foam on different weekends, do we do like we start off with junior and then we have the midweek and then we finish the senior? I think there's some value to doing that and value to not doing it. But the bottom line is by 28 at the latest, and maybe even sooner, maybe 27, we'll see a junior event globally.
Awesome. That sounds cool. Um, Another thing that is not a question, but just wanted to say that man is the standard for class personified. So it's nice to get questions like that in as well. So thanks for that. That is
Thank
for
you.
you.
Thank you.
um,
Thank you.
and there are lots of questions that sort of overlap. Then another one that might be important. Why is a response to the world's host being put on a podcast and not on WDBF's own website or social media?
Yeah, no, that's fair. Because we haven't made a decision, and we've talked about some of the things outstanding that we need to validate and we need to confirm. And once all that's done, then we'll be in a better position. Right now, I know we're talking a bit in hypotheticals. Um, I think I think one of the practical reasons is, like at the beginning, we were saying, Stefan, you invited me to have this conversation, and but then since we've seen like conversations on social media, we know there's conversations happening with athletes, and so we'll speak to it as best we can. And then when the time comes and there's more official information to share, we will do that on the website, and then we can have another discussion with whoever, or an open forum or something, to do that. So it's not either or. It's just timing wise, it just seemed that this was probably a good time to address some of the things that were being discussed, but we're not making any official announcements or statements yet in terms of that
Yeah,
next year.
fair enough. Yeah, and if someone wants to listen to like 2.5 or 3 hours of us talking, then there's the possibility. And if you don't, you just wait
Yeah,
for WDBF to release the dates
yeah,
and be done with it.
yeah.
So a few last questions, which go more into the specifics of Saudi Arabia, I think. Are there rules of conduct in the hall, in the hotel, in public, or on the streets, in other zones? If so, what are they and for whom? Are there any
Sorry.
like
Um,
the question is if there
yeah.
are any specific rules for players who go to Saudi Arabia,
Yeah.
um, in order how they have to conduct themselves?
There's nothing special about, like, I mean, you can't in most of the Middle East, certainly Saudi Arabia. There isn't public displays of affection are very frowned upon, right? So it's a little bit, in that respect, there wouldn't be, people wouldn't be encouraged to display affection and like physical contact in the same way that we might be accustomed to elsewhere. Um, Other than that, there's, most of the Middle East, the culture is very modest in terms of what you wear, but I mean, people would dress in like Western clothing. You'd wear what you'd wear, and certainly at the venue, if we go to a venue in any country, it's very strict. Uh, you know, the kits are the kits, right? So if you're wearing shorts or short shorts or leggings or tank tops or V cuts or whatever, those are all part of the kits and acceptable to wear.
Mm. Okay, so basically, outside you just have to adhere to the rules of the country, but in the zone, maybe the event or the accommodations, are there special or different rules?
No, no. Accommodations are whatever. Like, you want to stay with a friend, if it's a couple and you're married, if it's two two people of the same sex. I mean, two people of the same sex. There's no limitations on the accommodations. You book them as you would anywhere, and you're free
Mm,
to you know do what you want in your hotel. Obviously, um,
mm,
the same. The venue to the venues basically kind of our space. Out in public, as I said, there are certain rules in the Middle East around expectations for dress. It's a bit more modest, but I mean, you know, wear jeans and a t-shirt would be kind of standard.
mm. Okay. And what are the rules regarding political topics and the display of them? What is allowed and what is not?
Yeah. So if you're speaking specifically to, like, for all the hosts, it's a little different. But in in Argentina is more Western that way. The government is a bit on the right conservative side in Argentina right now. In Saudi Arabia, you'd have to. They wouldn't allow like political commentary. There, protest or political messages. Um, that's not allowed in the country. So you wouldn't be able to kind of like, even a shirt that said, free Free Palestine, or if you want to wear a shirt that said, I stand with Ukraine, or you know what I mean, like whatever.
Mhm.
That's not uh, uh, allowed and accepted in the culture, which I know is a big
Mhm.
difference from
And
Western culture.
yeah, and in the event, would the same rules stand like in the sports hall?
Uh, I'd have to, like, my understanding is that from a political social messaging that it does also apply in the sports hall, but I would have to go back and explore that specifically. Because I want to make sure we have the right answer, and I think it is, but
Uh,
I'd have to check for sure.
all right. Okay, so I think then the final question for me is like, um, regardless of which country it's gonna be, what are you looking forward to the next World Championships? What's it gonna be like? How many nations? How big is the event gonna be? How many days? Do you have
Yeah,
any ideas? Something you can share with us?
yeah, I think for all applicants, we've asked them to project over a week, and we've asked them to project at around a similar number to Graz, but it's difficult, right? Because depending on, every country is going to have reasons why it's going to be difficult for countries to go, whether that's distance and costs or visas or the social perspective. So I think there's a different, it's hard to say kind of what the number is going to be, but what we've asked countries is to plan for 130 or so teams, definitely all six divisions, of course, and to look at about a week's length in time.
Mm, okay. And is there anything else that you feel like we've missed out on or that might be important regarding this topic?
Well, we've got. I mean, we have had national federations like submit questions to us. We have had athletes, of course, submit their questions to their federations, and so if people have questions, like I mean, we've had back and forth with all the national federations um, that have expressed concern over where we choose to go in 26. So I would say contact those federations. You can have those discussions. There's lots of questions that have been asked and answered, and I'm sure there's lots of questions that people have that maybe we haven't asked and answered. So if you've got some to submit, then please do, and we'll continue to kind of get the most information that we can to you. I know that it's probably been frustrating because it's been a few months and it's like we're talking hypotheticals, um, but like I said, we're closer than further from being able to make that decision and to share additional information with everyone.
Mhm. Is there maybe a current Q&A on the website or something where you can maybe look up questions that have
Uh,
been asked recently or frequently?
yeah, not yet, not yet, and but there will be, of course, when the decision is made. But I like I said, I would encourage to reach out to your national federations because they've had questions and there's been discussions there that they can probably share.
Awesome. All right, Wayne, then thank you so much for hopping on, taking that time out of your day. Another 2.5 hours added to your dodgeball total.
Yeah,
For
no
me
worries.
personally, thanks a lot for all the work you're doing and for
Thanks, Stefan.
helping this community grow at the rate it does. I know there's a lot of behind the scenes work and you're lifting a heavy load of that one. So thank you for all of it. And yeah, I hope the community answers with support and constructive criticism. And yep, and maybe you'll hop on if the decision is final for another short round to address the points that we couldn't get
Sure.
into right now. And with that, thank you.
No,
Keep throwing
thank
those
you.
balls. Try not to get caught.
Yeah, try not to get hurt. Thanks, everyone. Thank you, Stefan. I appreciate that very much. Yeah.